as governor and maybe have a chance to have a better system in place. Again, this is a system breakdown, and you need a system fix. And just having a new governor occupy that office doesn't provide that.
What's the root cause of the breakdown, and what does the fix look like?
I think the rising power of public employee unions has had an effect on this. They've reached a level of power in Sacramento that's untoward and unusual. They're always going to have a certain amount of power, but in Sacramento it seems to be out of sorts. I think that the Proposition 13, what was happening before Prop 13 was that local government and state government weren't keeping their eye on the ball of rising costs of government. And when a citizens group took the initiative, the government didn't respond quickly enough to address it. And so we ended up with Prop 13, which was a displacement of how we spend money on services. But the government was flush with cash at the time. So rather than adjust to what the future revenue stream would look like, they said, let's just use the cash we have and spend it down and act like this didn't really happen. So they bailed out the local governments. And it worked for a while, worked for about 10 years. Somewhere in the 1980s, we hit a recession, and it started to come home to roost. And it's been coming home to roost. The governor calls it kicking the can down the road, but we've been extending and building a structural deficit in the state. And we have no control over spending money. We have a system of taxation that's post Prop 13 that's extremely cyclical. So in the good times, we get a lot of money, more than we need to support the existing program. In bad times, way less than we need, which is where we are now. So it would make sense that when you're in those better times, you'd conserve those dollars for the bad times. We don't do it because politicians like money to spend to impress their constituencies. So we ramped up the cost of government, and we were very inefficient about it. And so you end up with a bigger service load, not necessarily the services that you need in order to meet the public good. And when you hit the bad times, it's not easy to reduce the size of government. It's a lot easier to build it up than it is to take it down. There's tremendous resistors in the system and tremendous costs with getting smaller. In business, it's a lot easier to make decisions and say, okay, we've got to right size our company. In government, it's not easy to do that. And so you end up becoming very inefficient and tends not to work well. So those are a number of things, and then you pile on all these other initiatives that the public has been being fed by different groups that have passed, and it's become clunky. This includes the 2/3 votes that are required on some things, and you've got the minority running the majority, nobody taking accountability in the legislature. There's all these things. An executive branch that was designed to be strong, which has actually become weak. Just a bunch of stuff. So what we're talking about is taking a look at all of this and seeing if we can't get a rational set of things. It'll probably take 10 or 15 significant changes in the Constitution in order to really get at this. And they need to be packaged as one thing, because the public is not going to have the tolerance to vote for 15 different things. They'll vote them all down. And that's what a constitutional convention can do. It can actually say, we've looked at this, this is what you have to do. And you may not like every element of this, but if you look at it as a package, it's what we, people you can trust, want to see happen. But unfortunately, anyone who tries to give you a simple answer for how we got here, I think is not being, either they don't know or they're not being upfront with you.
A specific item in the November ballot that might address some of the problems where we have a simple majority can pass a school bond or pass a state ballot.
Because there'll be groups that can legitimately look at that and pick it on and say they're going to raise your taxes and pick that off, apart from other things that might be in a transformational revision of the Constitution, and say, here come those tax and spend liberals again. And unfortunately, if you poll the public on that, as soon as you start feeding them those arguments, the thing that starts at about 48% support drops down to about 28, 32%. And so, well-intended, perhaps the right thing to do, but worthy of discussion about how we do this. I think in the right environment, you could have a conversation in California about this issue, because we're one of only 3 states in the country that requires a budget vote of 2/3. Everywhere else it's less than that. And we're the only state in the country that requires a 2/3 vote both to increase taxes and to pass a budget, one state out of 50. So I think with in a constitutional convention setting, you might be able to convince the vote, well, why are we such an outlier? Are we that much smarter than everybody else? Maybe we are. But at least have that conversation. Maybe the delegates will determine it should be 3/4. I don't know. They might be right. But it's a question of the process by which you get there. Our measure certainly enables that conversation of voter thresholds to take place. And I would, I would say it's a worthy conversation. If 51% of the people in a community think we should be paying more on our property taxes to enhance school services, or to build new recreation facilities, or to have more cops on the street, I think they should have that opportunity. But that's what I think. I think it's more important to find out what you think as a society. And if you all come to that conclusion, that would weigh heavily, I think, on the voters who ultimately are going to weigh in on this.
I'm a recent grad of UC San Diego, just graduated this year, and I was a member of the UC Student Association, which is the UC Student Advocacy Group in Sacramento. Our elected officials in the legislature are at times almost as frustrated as us students and us as an electorate at their inability to reform California. Their hands are tied by these past propositions that mandate certain funding levels of certain programs. Education has to be at this percentage, highways need to be funded here, that they're only left with a fraction of discretionary funding. In Sacramento, it's a monopoly between the Indian gaming interests, the California Teachers Association, the prison guard unions, and basically when I've gone to ask our elected officials for help, all they've basically said is there a way that you can give me cover? Because these guys are going to go after me. They're going to go after my seat. They're going to take away my funding for my next election in 2 years. And so it just, in my experience, it seems as if the legislature and our elected officials are unable to even enact reforms in the current state of our government.
It is in fact a broken system. It needs to be fixed. It's not going to work with tweaks. You can't have legislators feel in their day-to-day existence like they're beholden to interest groups like this. You've got to have, leadership requires some degree of a feeling that you have the power to lead, that there's a freedom to express your opinion, and you have